What is consciousness? From my previous video, if you haven't actually watched, from part 2 to part 3, how do we define consciousness in terms of the physics and the reality of nature? Now, leading from my previous video on my 5-part series, consciousness is essentially described as a physical phenomenon that occurs within the brain. Now, to specify this podcast will cover more of it in detail. Now, there's a lot of information that I will be covering now, so be aware that this information is very in-depth. A lot of it's philosophical, a lot of it is very related to physics. So to begin, consciousness itself, when we look at consciousness, when we look at what consciousness attributes to the physicality of the world, our eye, what we see with our eyes, like how I'm looking left and right here, our eyes have 8 million receptors, light cone receptors that occur in our brain. So when you think about life, right, and you say, oh, what is life? How do we exist in life? Our physical reality, our consciousness is intertwined with our external body and our reality. The world we live in, this space, this environment here that I'm staying in, is one form of reality. But there's an internal and external reality. There is, of course, the physical features that you can see of me, but there's also the external reality behind me, such as what I'm pointing at. And there's also the internal reality of you, the observer, and your environment and what you're perceiving. So when we look at our consciousness and we look at the state, there's one particular famous philosopher, who wrote a book called Consciousness Explained, which I recommend. His name is Daniel Dennett. He writes about consciousness and various different topics. Now, the reason why I bring up Daniel Dennett is because Daniel Dennett was one of the leading philosophers, also a psychologist, famous author who's still alive in his 70s. He's 77. Originally born in the UK, I believe. Yes, I believe it would be American. And he establishes the notion and idea of consciousness existing as a physical reality, as interconnections of neurons that run through our brain. So if you want to imagine here, right, that there is a neuron, and the neuron is moving, and in the neuron there's these dendrites, which is the electrochemical signals that exist, and those electrochemical signals go from the back of your brain or from the front of your brain, somewhere within the regions of your prefrontal cortex, which is the front part of your head, or the back portion of your skull, of your brain. They travel through to your eyes, into your optic nerve, which connects your eyeball. Pretend this is an eyeball, and this is the optic nerve, if you can imagine, going into the eyeball and showing the visible reality of which we live in. We have the external and internal stimuli that affects our brains and our bodies. It affects me recording. It affects the energy and particles around us. This reality of which we live in is a physical reality. And what I was mentioning before is that consciousness itself has a physical reality, a physical nature, and a lot of physicists actually describe this. We have one particular physicist whose name is John Bell, who wrote in the early 1920s, who's famous for the Bell curve. He actually described in definition Einstein's theories. He said that as human beings, we have the capacity to really understand the universe around us. But notions of time and space and causality, what we consider as reality, are far more complicated, and consciousness is just beginning to define what it is that we are. What is the state of consciousness and the state of being? There are several questions that are associated with consciousness, such as, what is consciousness? Do human beings have consciousness? How do we become conscious? How do we become aware? The state of awareness. What do we do with awareness? Right? How do we live our lives? Because if you think about it, many people today do not live in a state of awareness, conscious awareness. We have technology, we have people around us. You can walk outside and you can see people just going about their lives, not being conscious or completely aware of their environment, as well as their internal thought mechanisms that run through their minds. And of course, the stimuli that exist with our 5 senses creates a physical reality of which we live in, that we subscribe to on a daily basis. That's a scary thing to think about, don't you think? That our own physical reality, which we live in, that we think we can control, we can't. But not even just that, many times our thoughts wander. We don't develop this mindset to actually control our conscious state of being. But not only is that interesting, but when we look at other religions, we look at other belief systems, we can see that there's a lot of physics intertwined behind it. But one thing I want to mention is that there's this one particular interesting idea that I came across when it comes to consciousness, and this is the idea of biocentrism. Now, there are several principles in biocentrism, and there's a very good book which I recommend you read called Biocentrism. And I don't want to get into all the details with the book, but essentially mentions about the importance of quantum mechanics, quantum physics within our reality. Now, to describe a little bit about this, I don't know if you guys know so much about quanta or the idea of energy fluctuations, the idea of having an atom. An atom is essentially a particle, an indivisible particle that we know now today in current science to actually be divisible, and particulate have waves, which known as an amplitude. You have a crest, so you have a top and we have the bottom of a frequency of waves. And if you ever have questions, please look at other YouTube videos. If you do not understand these terms or ideas in my podcast, please watch other YouTube videos on physics in regards to this question. I do not have time to describe all of these scientific terms to you because this channel is primarily focused on the ideas associated with consciousness, at least this particular series. But if you have technical scientific questions, please look at other YouTube videos. Please read books about this. I have to explain the technicalities to get to the position of which I'm explaining. So to continue, when we look at the physics and the reality, if we look at the way waves of energy function within electrons, within the atom itself, right, we can see quantum mechanics. It explains the fundamental principles and mechanics behind how our universe operates. And we have 5 different states of matter in which that operates, right? We have the strong force, which holds all objects together. We have the weak force. And we have 3 other forces, which I can't remember currently. We also have, we have the electromagnetic force. Just remembered. So we have electricity and magnetism that are combined. And we have another 2 forces that physics and quantum physics describes in very good detail if you look at the scientific principles. Now, there's a lot of information out on quantum mechanics and physics that I recommend you read about, but that quantum mechanics and physics intertwines within the consciousness of our reality. And what do I mean by that? Well, if we look at our reality, if you walk outside, we have energy, we have particles that come around us everywhere. We have energy that influences our being. We have energy that influences, for example, my dragon necklace here. We have energy that influences our state of awareness, our consciousness, the food we eat. It just creates energy. Energy is all around us. It's all around us and in us and through us, and it spreads out everywhere. So when you look at the reality of consciousness and you see this ideology, we can see that there's a lot to describe with the physicality, with the reality, there is a big notion of how we describe and how do we determine what that reality in our lives is. For example, when we walk about our day and we live every day, we experience different energy flows. We experience peaks. Those are physical phenomena that's occurring within our brain. Consciousness is within us. This is a concept that I think many people don't really understand. I believe firmly that consciousness that we perceive as human beings, our perception, our reality, which we see through our senses, which we perceive, through our senses, which we see through our eyes, one form of sense that we have as human beings, that reality exists because of who we are as human beings, because we cannot perceive of things outside of our senses, aside from metaphysical ideologies and beliefs and principles that exist beyond the senses, like the ideas of God, the ideas, right, of a transcendent being. And that book actually of biocentrism, talks about these ideologies. What separates fundamental ideologies of, right, science, which was established, versus Christian thought, and how Christian thought, or more importantly, religion, had influenced and created many aspects of science today that exist, that many scientists are not willing to admit, but have been deduced from religion, because religion had brought in a lot of science into this age, and it is a big debate among scientists today of how science actually was formed. But many scientists who are complete atheists will agree with me when I say this claim that religion has influenced science. Whether it be positive or negative, it has certainly influenced it, and it has brought about many ideologies that have formed. And you can look at Isaac Newton, you can look at Galileo, you can look at other people who were religious, who are scientists as well, who then influence many communities around us and have these scientific theories, right? Newton's laws, we have Einstein's laws, other people who were religious and now are not religious, or who were religious, and brought their religiosity to other societies and rejected through the notions of scientific theories that do not require the notions of God or the Judeo-Christian conception to exist within the reality amongst us. So, with all that being said, not to get on a massive tangent, but when we look at the physical reality of our cranium and our prefrontal cortex, which is the front of our head, and we look at the back portions of a region of our brain where speech comes in the back, where we can actually communicate, and language comes in through those regions. When we look at the brain and we look at how we are as human beings, we can see that consciousness is a physical state, a physical reality, much as is me touching my hands and creating energy. Energy is established in us and through us and around us. But that energy is expansive and exists throughout the universe. And much of that energy is unknown. Much of what we consider as reality exists within our own sphere of understanding, our own, in a sense, you could describe it, if you can imagine it visually, a biosphere of reality of which we can see and we live in. Our existence as human beings on this planet. Each individual person has a different perceptual reality of where they can see with their eyes, where they are physically stationed on this earth, where they can move, and where they could think. But outside of our thoughts, or within our thoughts, is the ultimate reality of perception. Now, that this perception of reality that exists within our minds exists within a deep conscious state. Now, many people actually try to acquire this through meditation or through breathing or even through psychotropic drugs, right? Marijuana, PCP, there's a whole plethora of different types of drugs that people use to alter their minds, alter their perceptions, to actually see reality or to perceive consciousness to some extent. Some people have done it to some avail, and some of it has been greater than others. There are different techniques to be used, obviously, but the way I like to personally do it myself is I like to meditate. I feel like there is a transcendent peace within myself when I do that. Here on YouTube, here on my channel of The Love of Wisdom. But I also realize, I also realize that there's a lot of essence when it comes to perceiving the reality amongst us. How do we go about perceiving that reality? So there's very many quantum physicists, and even Einstein had even admitted that there is a reality of a consciousness of total existence that exists outside of us as human beings that we have to embrace and understand. But what I want to leave with you guys is this notion that consciousness is physical, that we have a physical limitation to how we can see things as human beings, and that we can actually, given our capacity, because our human brain at most weighs about 3.5, less than 4 or 5 pounds. Some brains weigh heavier, but the brain weighs about 3.3 to 3.5 pounds at its heaviest. How our brain could absorb and understand this state of consciousness, the state of reality. How amazing is that something so small and so physical, right, can establish the reality to which we can understand consciousness, and how complicated things are, relationships, our life, right, our intellect, all these avenues and topics of human consciousness, of human, or I should say, of human understanding that exists, and the conscious state or the conscious awareness to which we as human beings live through is so far vast, even more vast than this universe behind me, that we cannot understand. Or maybe it's just as big. Maybe the cosmos, right? Maybe the cosmos are the ultimate consciousness. Maybe the consciousness we exist is that. Or maybe not. Maybe there's something more. No one will know that answer to that question. But for what is known, consciousness, the way it's perceived, is through a physical state, because our perceptions alter that reality. But consciousness could be something far more than just a physical state, far more than just the 5 senses. But from what is gathered from most scientists today, it is a physical state. But that physical state is interacted with everything. There is more. Even though we are energy, we are more than just simply energy. We are energy existing within the nature and the fabric of reality. And that nature and fabric of reality is time and space, the galaxy, the cosmos, human relationships, and every single thing that we interact with in this universe as human beings, individually, and collectively. That is what establishes us. And with that, I like to conclude further into my other podcasts. I know this podcast is a bit short, but further into it, I'll be describing more about the philosophy. But what I do really want to mention is that physics and the way quantum physics has been designed from the 19th to the 21st century is really focused on understanding the nature of reality. We've had the Higgs boson, which just came out, the scientific article about 2 or 3 years prior. I believe it was 2015 when it came out. I could be wrong, it is 2019 now. And then we've had other forms of scientific research that have been done conclusively in China and other locations where people are trying to understand the nature of energy particles and the mystery behind it. And there are many great books that I could easily recommend, but I'd rather you all learn about this and see it, because I really believe that there's conscious state, the way we look at, and consciousness itself ties into the reality of human nature, ties into the metaphysical principles. I mentioned that human beings in my previous previous podcast have the tendency to actually assume certain ideologies. People do not know what consciousness is. They do not understand what their state of being is, their state of awareness. But when we look at the physics, particularly we look at quantum theory, and we will look at how the formation of quantum theory, Schrodinger's cat, and other quantum entanglement is another perfect example, how that exists within energy particles and the nature of energy particles and the nature of subatomic particles. We have electrons, neutrons, positrons, protons, antiprotons. We have all these different forms of particles that I can continue mentioning. There's a whole massive list that has been actually described in the realm of physics and the physics community, the physics societies of the world have actually described subatomic particles in a list that you can actually read and look up online, which is very fascinating. And it describes the nature of how particles and quantum mechanics actually functions more on a physical level. And what a lot of scientists have actually come and concluded from this information is that there's so many particles and so many influences and so many understandings and so many fine-tuned scientific principles that exist. Many very precise to the decimal, to the 99th decimal accuracy, that if it were not that accurate, our reality, our world, our Earth, our planet would not exist. That if our planet Earth was only so much closer, almost so much further away, if we were only so much closer to the sun, we would burn. And if we were only so much further away, we would freeze. And there's also other technicalities too. The rotation of gravity around our Earth, how our Earth wobbles and spins around an axis, planets and their interactions with our planet, the cosmological spectrum, energy particles, how energy functions, even the elements that are within our planet. There's so many physical things that exist within our reality, our consciousness, our conscious state, that affect us on a daily basis that we don't even think about, Even the rays of the sun, it's fascinating to think about this. It takes 8 minutes from the light of the sun in the universe to reach our planet at light speed. And light is about 186,000 miles per second. Let me repeat that. That's crazy. That means at 186,000 miles per second, it takes 8 minutes for the sun to reach our planet. And when it reaches our planet, it gives life. And that light that is emitted in different forms of radiation and photons that build bacteria, microbacteria, and microorganisms to actually grow, to actually cause life to blossom and exist. How crazy is that? Just think about that principle, let alone the physics behind the light of which is being emitted and how light operates within our atmosphere, the biosphere of the Earth's physical structure, and also how living organisms such as human beings exist within our planet, how we're able to actually think about these things that exist around us, our conscious awareness, like some people say, our conscious state. This is an amazing phenomenon. Therefore, I like to say that with this notion of this phenomenon of consciousness, I like to further get involved. And the fourth podcast, which I'll be describing to you guys, which is consciousness and how consciousness came about through philosophy. Before, or you can say as through science, but primarily through philosophy, and like to focus on the fourth podcast. Now, if you guys don't know already, I'm starting a podcast. I'm starting a live epistemological podcast, which is, I study epistemology. I focus a lot as a philosopher on epistemology, which is the study of knowledge and how we come to know what is true and how we define truth. And I'm going out in the streets of Chico, California, and I'm going and speaking with people, hopefully within a month or two, depending on the city councils, depending on the city of Chico and what they're saying is on me as a YouTuber, assuming they watch my videos. But I am going to on the streets of Chico, California, and I'm going to be going in the farmer's market, and I'll actually be doing real epistemology. So if you do see me there, please comment below, please subscribe, please say hello, please a like, thumb up on this video. I will be doing actual epistemology. I'll be getting all the equipment and camera. I actually just recently got a tripod, which is really great. So now I can actually keep my videos in place, which I think. Thank you all for the support so far. I'd like to thank my fans. And again, please follow, please subscribe below on this video. If you have any questions, please comment below on this video. I will answer them. Hopefully, I'm usually very busy at the moment, but I try my best to actually answer any questions that people have on my YouTube channel. Again, my name is Anthony Pensa. This is the Love of Wisdom podcast, and this is a 5-part series on consciousness. Thank you all for watching. And hopefully, I think within next week or so, I'll be uploading video. But thank you again, and I hope you guys have a beautiful day.